loud, subversive, vulgar, unapologetic. These are words one could use to describe the atmosphere of the modern Pride Parade. The gay community has long been characterized by the idea of pride in one's identity, adopting a flippant attitude towards scrutiny and standing strong in their refusal to change themselves for the sake of others. This same stubbornness has played a larger role in the incredibly rapid socio-political progress that the LGBT community has made in recent decades in the face of oppression. For years, the gay community was forced into silence and shame by American society, constantly being subject to threats of damnation, ostracism, assault, and police brutality. Public animosity towards the community grew steadily, abetted by a series of homophobic laws passed between the 1940s and 60s, enabling the wrongful arrest and persecutions of thousands of gay Americans. Police arbitrarily raided gay bars and harassed the patrons without facing any legal or social consequences for their behavior. However, this would all change following one such raid conducted on a gay bar known as the Stonewall Inn. On June 28, 1969, at a rundown bar in New York, the history of gay rights in America would be changed forever. A huge gathering of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender individuals stood up to the suppression and subjugation they were forced to endure, making their presence and agitation with their treatment known. On that night, the barrier of forced silence for the LGBT community was broken forever, paving the way for the movement that would follow. Violent, pronounced, and impossible to ignore, the Stonewall Riots forever altered the course of the gay rights movement in America.
What Jimmy didn't know was that Ralph was sick, a sickness that was not visible like smallpox, but no less dangerous and contagious, a sickness of the mind. You see, Ralph was a homosexual.
Homophobia, just as with all forms of discrimination, is taught. If and when the subject was introduced to children, homosexuality was presented as a disease of the mind and soul, a belief that continued into adulthood. Homosexual acts were outlawed in every state as a result of sodomy laws, which allowed for the detainment of homosexuals for up to 20 years. Gay and transgender individuals could not openly speak about or act upon their true nature, often choosing to pass as straight to prevent social scrutiny. At the turn of the 20th century, the nature and origins of homosexuality were brought into question with the release of many scientific writings, such as Studies in the Psychology of Sex Volume 2, which for the first time proposed the radical suggestion that homosexuality was not a disease of the soul, but rather a result of biological predisposition. These scientific writings gradually led to a small rise in support for the gay community. Support continued to grow with the creation of the first gay rights organization in America, the Society for Human Rights. The SHR was forced to operate underground, communicating with its supporters through a newsletter known as Friendship and Freedom. The society would later be forcefully disbanded after many members and leaders were arrested. In the 1950s, the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis emerged. Founded on the idea that opposition to LGBT progress was thwarted by a lack of understanding, both were dedicated to securing rights for the gay community through activism and education. The slow and steady work of gaining acceptance for gay Americans would soon be met with harsh opposition. In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a mental disorder. The next year, President Eisenhower would ban homosexuals for working for the federal government. Treatment of gay Americans continued to worsen, and it became common for cross-dressers or flamboyant men to be harassed on the street. However, the police were the worst offenders. Throughout the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, police would use the masquerade laws as an excuse to assault drag queens and butch women. The masquerade laws included the so-called 3-article rule, which decreed that anyone not wearing at least 3 articles of gender-appropriate clothing was indecent and could be arrested on the spot. Strip searches to check someone's gender, verbal degradation, and even physical violence were commonplace. Nowhere was this more evident than in New York, where the obscure clubs and seedy bars attracted a large gay population. The bars and clubs soon became a place of solace for the gay community, serving as a place where they could be themselves and free of scrutiny. Soon, police officers would enter the bars and apprehend the owners on the premise of selling bootlegged alcohol or violating health codes, arresting or chasing off the patrons in the process. For years, patrons of gay bars responded to police intervention by fleeing the scene, spending their nights fearful of being hurt or detained. This all changed after one fateful raid on the Stonewall Inn.
So the fact that active resistance and protest continued, more than 2 nights and kept coming back, right, in these waves, and that it spilled onto the streets of Greenwich Village, and people who hadn't been inside the bar itself, inside the Stonewall Inn, participated and supported it.
The Stonewall Inn was a rundown gay bar located in New York's Greenwich Village with a reputation for attracting sleazy customers. With no running water and boarded-up windows, the Stonewall served watered-down, bootlegged alcohol in order to turn a profit. One night in late June, the bar was packed to the brim with patrons drinking, dancing, and socializing. The police arrived on the scene without warning. They roughly shoved patrons who began to filter outside and apprehended the staff. Everything was operating as usual, right until the police began arresting the patrons. The patrons began to protest, yelling and cursing at the officers. The crowd began yelling at the officers and crowding around them, its anger growing at a fever pitch. What happened next is the subject of much debate, with many theories as to who threw the first brick. One theory involves the apprehension of Stormy DeLavery, a drag king who witnesses claim looked to the crowd upon her arrest and begged them to do something. Nonetheless, in a moment, the protest had become a riot. Pennies, bottles, stones, and possibly even bricks were hurled at police as the crowd shouted at the officers in protest. Years of pleas for acceptance instantly became a demand. Officers barricaded themselves in the bar, while the crowd, by now an angry mob, continued to riot. After backup arrived and dispersed the crowd, the protest didn't stop. The Stonewall reopened the next night, and yet another mob formed outside until police arrived and forcefully dispersed the protesters with tear gas. The protest lasted 5 nights, drawing more attention than ever before to the size and presence of the LGBT movement.
But I think at the time, in the late 1960s and then early 1970s, that the effects are that kind of, if we can think about Stonewall as not just an event, but a broader moment of the rise of gay liberation, then, there's certainly a lot of negative reaction, but there's also a fair amount of sort of starting to take gay politics, or what was then called gay, now we would say LGBT politics, more seriously as something, as a community that would fight back, that wasn't passive, that wasn't just sort of something to be mocked, wasn't a joke, wasn't a sickness, but was a political movement, right? And a kind of politicized identity. I think that's the most significant impact in a kind of starting to change into a more positive view in the broader public.
The next year, thousands of members of the LGBT community gathered in New York once more to celebrate the anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, holding a celebration that is now acknowledged as the first Pride Parade. Since then, the gay rights movement was changed forever. Community members paraded the streets holding massive banners and displaying their identities with pride. The new LGBT movement would never again tone itself down for the sake of gradual acceptance. It was now all or nothing. From that gathering, the LGBT community organized with blinding speed. Hundreds of gay rights groups formed, new terms were popularized, state sodomy laws were gradually repealed, and in 2015 the United States Supreme Court ruled that laws barring same-sex marriage were unconstitutional. It is undeniable that without the Stonewall Riots, the LGBT community would not be where it is today. The night the community stood together against oppression proved the place they have in American society, paving the way for the incredible progress that would come to follow. The new LGBT movement made a statement that they deserve the same treatment as any other American. They were done waiting to be accepted, instead insisting that they were and always have been a part of American society. As stated by one protester, "We have to be visible. We should not be ashamed of who we are. We have to show the world that we are numerous, that there are many of us out there,